Imagine working under someone you think is beneath you. Joseph faces just that, a team of arrogant, high-educated employees who look down on him. One of the staff boldly declares, "We would need to be paid 5 times our current salary." But Joseph's calm response changes everything. What happens next? You'll have to watch to find out. We'd need to be paid 5 times our current salary to work for an idiot like you, a high school dropout. It's hard enough for us to match up to you. It's completely unreasonable. Someone without an education like you shouldn't be a leader. As the team leader of a certain project, I was struggling with the arrogant behavior of the members who graduated from Stanford. They looked down on me and mocked me for my high school dropout status. I endured this humiliation while working. One day, Troy, the leader of the highly educated group, snapped back when I reprimanded him for being late. Do you think someone as dumb as a high school dropout can give me orders? He hurled unbearable insults at me, and then a few days later, he brought along his entourage of junior colleagues and issued a shocking threat, saying, "If you don't raise our salaries by 5 times, we will all quit." I see. I'll discuss this with the CEO. I picked up the phone and called the CEO. And then, as they awaited the verdict, their faces turned pale. I am Joseph Butler. I am a 35-year-old office worker working for a company. On the surface, I appear to be an ordinary man, but my journey to this point has been rather unique. Most people in society study towards their dreams and goals during their school days and decide their path. Everyone has their ups and downs, overcomes the tough job hunting process, gets job offers, graduates from college, and makes a grand entrance into society. What sets me apart is that my highest level of education is high school dropout. I'm not particularly ashamed of it, but when people hear about it for the first time, they're almost always shocked. Whether it's in a good or bad way depends on the person. Being a high school dropout in this day and age comes with its own reasons, and it was a path I chose for myself. Going back about 19 years, when I was just 16 years old and had just entered high school, I faced the greatest hardship of my life. It was just an ordinary Sunday. My father and mother went out to do some grocery shopping and asked me to watch the house as usual. They never came back. On their way home, a drunk driver going the wrong way at high speed crashed into them head-on. The scene was apparently quite horrific, and there was no chance of survival for the drunk driver, my father, or my mother. When I got the call from the police about the sudden tragedy, I couldn't accept the reality. In front of my parents' almost unrecognizable bodies, I could do nothing but cry like a broken doll. However, no matter how much I cried or screamed, everyday life inevitably continued. After the funeral and other procedures led by my relatives, it was decided that I would be adopted by my mother's younger sister and her husband. My new father and mother continued to encourage me kindly, sometimes scolding me, sometimes taking me out to play, and treating me like their real son. I remember that well. In that house lived my cousins, a brother and sister, who were still in elementary school. I took care of them and played with them. As time went on, the days of crying and shutting myself away gradually decreased, and I found myself naturally able to smile again. I was surprised by this realization. It was truly fortunate that I was taken in by such a wonderful family. Even now, I feel that from the bottom of my heart. By the time I reached my 3rd year of middle school, I had completely regained my mental health. However, I also noticed that the cost of raising me was putting a strain on the family finances. Originally, my uncle and aunt had not planned for a 3rd child. While our life wasn't poor compared to others around us, it wasn't wealthy either. It was a life lived with frugality in mind. In fact, soon after they took me in, my aunt, who had been a housewife, started working part-time. I'd like to discuss my career. At the individual consultation for future paths, I handed the teacher the paper I was holding. and I poured out the thoughts that I had been thinking about daily. I told him that, as he knew, I was currently living in my relative's house, that I had a younger brother and sister, and that I wanted to help with the family finances because I was grateful. My teacher listened quietly to the conclusion I had come to after thinking hard as a child. To ensure that my younger brother and sister wouldn't have fewer options in life, I wanted to contribute at least to their tuition. My career aspiration form had the word employment written on it. Naturally, in this era, it was very limited where a high school dropout could be employed. It would be a tough jobs hunt, and my family and others around me opposed it. However, I didn't want to burden my family any further. I strongly insisted that I wanted to work as soon as possible, and somehow I pushed through. Thus, I, a high school dropout, plunged into society. Even so, no matter how many companies I contacted with job postings, most of my resumes were rejected, and getting hired was out of the question. Looking back now, I realize how reckless and thoughtless I was. You could say it was the folly of youth. Bitterly experiencing the harshness of society that adults had talked about, I kept sending out resumes even after that, and while I couldn't just do nothing, I started working part-time at a nearby restaurant as a stopgap until I found a job. The restaurant mainly served creative cuisine and had many regular customers. I worked there almost every day in that fairly busy restaurant, and I was taught the basics of customer service and the rules of society. For a young person who was working for the first time, even that was stimulating and quite challenging. So, while sweating and catching a glimpse of a part of society, I found myself turning 18. I contributed my earnings to the household, but I was anxious about not being able to find a job at a company that would reassure my uncle and aunt. Due to the management policy, there was little hope for regular employment at the restaurant, and I was at my wits' end. However, a turning point came to me unexpectedly. In the restaurant, which had calmed down a bit after the peak, as I was clearing plates and cleaning as usual, I heard a commotion. I quickly headed towards the source of the noise, and there was a drunk who was about to grab a customer at the neighboring table. It was a tense situation. The man being confronted was a middle-aged regular customer who always came in wearing a suit. His hairstyle was always neatly done, giving a sharp impression, but his expression was always calm. I had heard his companions call him Stephen. He was a gentle customer who could hardly be imagined at the center of such a commotion. I recalled that he had come in alone that day. This meant that the man causing the trouble wasn't his companion, but another customer. Sensing the trouble, I quickly intervened between the two men. "Is everything all right, sir?" These kinds of altercations were commonplace in places that serve alcohol. Sometimes it was between staff and customers, and sometimes, like that day, it was a fight between customers for reasons unknown. Drawing on my experience, I skillfully separated the drunk from Stephen. A drunk so wasted that he could barely speak coherently would likely forget everything the next day anyway. I diverted his attention from Stephen to myself, nodding along to his incoherent complaints, and peacefully escorted him out. After successfully settling his bill and seeing him out, I sighed in relief. From the back of the kitchen, I heard the manager's carefree, "Good job." He was taking it easy, leaving the trouble handling to a part-timer. After witnessing the whole situation, Stephen approached me once things had calmed down and there were fewer customers in the restaurant. "Man, you really saved me back there. Thanks a lot." "No problem, you were in quite a tough spot yourself." In response to my reply, Stephen scratched his head awkwardly and murmured an apology. "But you work here almost every day, don't you? Every time I come here, you're always here. You look pretty young. Do you need that much money?" This casual conversation was a common question for me. Regular customers would inevitably notice that a young guy like me wasn't going to school and was working all the time. It's a long story. I wasn't hiding anything. While wiping down an empty table with a cloth, I started to talk about my background and current situation as usual. Normally, the conversation would end with the drunk customers patting me on the back, saying things like, "You're going through a lot, hang in there." But this day was different. Stephen suddenly fell silent, and I stopped what I was doing, worried that I had made the atmosphere heavy. I looked up in a panic. "Sorry for suddenly telling you all that." "No, it's fine." "It's not that." As he gently reassured me, I saw a tear run down Stephen's cheek as he pressed his fingers to the corners of his eyes, making me even more anxious. I had been sympathized with many times, but this was the first time someone had actually cried. He seemed to be a very empathetic person. I thought to myself, what a good person. "Oh, when you get older, your tear ducts get weak." Then, after a sniffle, Stephen reached into his pocket and pulled out a white card, handing it to me, who was now flustered. "Actually, despite how I may seem, I own a small company. What do you say? If you're interested, would you like to work for my company?" It was a sudden proposal. An adult with teary eyes offering a job to a young guy. The card I took with confusion was a business card with a strong font stating, "CEO of S&P Trading Company, Stephen Price." CEO. That's someone really important. Feeling both humbled and confused by Stephen's invitation, I could only blink in bewilderment. "I've often seen you at work. I don't know if our work aligns with your interests, but if you're willing, I believe you could become a valuable asset to our company. And don't worry, it's a full-time position." It was a path to regular employment that suddenly appeared before me. To me at that moment, Stephen was truly a savior and simultaneously a guiding father figure. My fingers trembled with joy and excitement as I held the business card. From the entire interaction, I could sense that this person was trustworthy, and even though I didn't know what kind of work they did, my heart felt compelled to follow him. There was no way I could refuse such an unexpected offer. "I'd love to. Please let me join your company." The next 17 years felt like they flew by. The senior employees patiently taught me, a kid with no real experience beyond simple customer service and chores. I didn't feel much of a complex about my high school dropout background, thanks to the many people who nurtured me without prejudice. Stephen was the same, often taking me along to negotiations with clients and social events, providing learning opportunities. There was a lot to learn, but I was blessed with good people and quickly absorbed new tasks, and by my mid-20s, I had become a well-regarded presence within the company. Currently, I am the team leader of a certain project. Over these 17 years, the company's performance has steadily improved, growing into a large enterprise, which allowed for stable salaries and bonuses. Busy as it was, life was smooth sailing. I had responsibilities and people who trusted me. That gave me immense satisfaction and added color to my life. Though I had stumbled along the way, I could proudly face my late parents and the family that kindly took me in, feeling proud of my work at this company. However, such peaceful days began to crumble due to the arrival of a certain individual. "Joseph, it's nice that you get paid just for checking on our progress every day." The words, dripping with malice and sarcasm, made me want to frown, but I held back and silently stared at the man in front of me. A slightly tense atmosphere arose between us, but unfortunately, reprimanding this insolent subordinate wouldn't shut his mouth. This man was Troy Wood. Troy was somewhat well-groomed, with a lanky frame and a slightly frivolous demeanor at 28 years old. He was also a Stanford graduate. He had joined the company as a mid-career hire about 6 months ago, a so-called highly educated talent. During his interview, he claimed that he could support our rapidly growing company and that he was looking to advance his own career, presenting a convincing case. I heard he was hired for his enthusiastic attitude and spirit. However, once assigned, what happened? I recalled the past 6 months of having to cover for Troy, and it almost made me dizzy. To sum him up, he was overconfident, a fast-talking orator, and someone who viewed himself as an absolute authority. As for the last part, that was merely his own perception. Despite working in a sizable team, Troy's lack of cooperativeness, due to his personality, often led to conflicts during meetings. He seemed to enjoy criticizing the ideas of other employees, going on long-winded speeches about how inefficient they were with his fast-talking mouth. In contrast, his ideas are often impractical and poorly thought out. That was my assessment, but Troy seemed very confident in his work and opinions. He always acted on his own, and even when I suggested discussing it more with the team, he usually just rattled off without considering any opposing views. At least within the project, Troy has never produced any successful results and has rather caused failures. His resilience may have been regarded as a strength, but it was past time he learned from his mistakes. In a way, he stood out and made his presence felt, but he was a real handful. Even at that moment, he refused to reply to my emails, claiming they'd disrupted his work, so I had no choice but to check on his progress in person. You can think whatever you want about me, but we have to talk about work. Without acknowledging my wry smile, Troy let out a short, disdainful laugh. His work attitude and unrealistic ideas, ignoring budget and manpower constraints, were all tough to correct. No, to be precise, it was a thankless job. In those 6 months, despite my desperate efforts, my guidance hadn't reached Troy at all. The employee working silently at the next desk was also fed up with Troy, thinking, "Here we go again." I handled all the complaints about Troy from other team members, and maintaining team harmony was part of my job as a leader. It was a real headache. Before he joined, I never had this much trouble keeping the team together. There were occasionally younger subordinates or juniors who acted recklessly due to their youth, but even then, we tried to incorporate each other's opinions and find a mutually agreeable path. But Troy was different. He didn't even recognize the company's established methods as guidelines. He was a runaway train, ignoring everything, a major troublemaker. I understand the importance of changing old systems and upgrading values, but he should have at least been able to do his job before boasting. After checking his progress, I sighed and returned to my desk, beginning to mentally reassign tasks. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that as soon as the thorn in his side was out of sight, Troy immediately started fiddling with his personal phone. Despite being such a troublemaker, there were still some in the company who sided with him. All of them were Stanford graduates like Troy. Most of them were younger than Troy. Their close connection due to being from the same university was evident from the way they frequently communicated within the company. In the noisy circle, Troy seemed to be elevated as a reliable senior. I once overheard someone say, "It's so cool how he speaks his mind without hesitation." The young employees who had now become like Troy's followers used to be quiet and obedient to instructions before he joined. Whether influenced by his ideas and speeches or driven by their own dissatisfaction, they had recently started complaining or sulking like children when asked to revise their work. Why had I ended up with the burden of taking care of these childish troubles? It all began on a certain day. About a month after Troy joined, I was reprimanding him for one of his many reckless actions, acknowledging his enthusiasm but warning him against proposing unapproved ideas to clients. Oh, do people with slow brains not understand the concept of eliminating waste? I was stunned by Troy's words. Though I had sensed he didn't like me, he had never been so direct. When he no longer hid his sneering attitude, I immediately realized what he had learned. As if to confirm my suspicion, Troy continued, "Oh, come to think of it, Joseph, you only graduated middle school, right? Sorry, I guess it can't be helped then." Usually a fast talker, he now spoke slowly and deliberately, clearly to ensure even an idiot like me could understand. It was obvious he was doing it on purpose. My educational background was well known within the company. So, hearing this information at some point after joining, Troy must have thought he had a complete upper hand, and from that moment on, my control over him was completely lost. Certainly, compared to Troy, a Stanford graduate, my thinking might be slower. That might be a fact. But even someone like me without higher education could tell that. His attitude indicated he didn't even see me as standing on the same stage. It was clear he looked down on me. Yet, in a situation where a senior was giving advice, he brazenly maintained his arrogant attitude, leaving me utterly speechless. The paths in life for a high school dropout like me and a Stanford graduate like Troy were obviously vastly different. Imagining each other's journeys without any effort to understand would be extremely difficult. Our values were shaped by such different lives. Conflicting opinions to some extent were inevitable. Still, being insulted to this extent was shocking, and I couldn't find any words to respond that day. So, I could only watch as Troy, now in a great mood, disappeared somewhere, and his followers, who had witnessed everything, seemed to have misunderstood the hierarchy within the team as having shifted. Since then, nothing has gone well at work. Mainly, the Stanford graduate group started picking their tasks, cutting corners, and not doing their jobs properly. I didn't want to think that all highly educated people behaved this way, but I couldn't understand what these smart individuals were thinking, taking such attitudes and proposing plans destined to fail. I didn't mind being a high school dropout, nor did I mind being ridiculed, but the impact it had on the company's overall operations was unacceptable. I constantly worried about how to change their attitudes. One day, the catalyst appeared suddenly. "Good morning." As Troy entered the office, more than 30 team members turned their gaze towards him. I stopped typing and looked in his direction. Unfazed by the room that had suddenly fallen silent, Troy sat at his desk as usual. The time displayed on the computer monitor read 11 a.m. Well past the starting time. "Troy." "Yes." "What is it?" "Don't play dumb. You are late." Troy, who seemed to not grasp the issue, rubbed his unusually sleepy eyes and let out a big yawn mid-conversation. He was well-groomed as usual, and his complexion looked good. He didn't seem unwell, nor did he appear to have rushed out after oversleeping. He hadn't shown up at the office without any notice, and despite several calls, he hadn't returned any of them. What on earth was he thinking? "Well, I always finish my work earlier than the regular time anyway, so there shouldn't be a problem, right?" Troy acknowledged his tardiness, but remained unrepentant, nonchalantly speaking. His words divided the office cleanly in two. On one side were those who already questioned Troy's behavior and statements, their internal exasperation palpable, some even furrowing their brows openly. On the other side were the young Stanford graduates who had become his followers, looking at him with admiration, likely thinking how bold and capable he was. However, contrary to his words, Troy's work was always sloppy and rarely followed the set standards. He never waited for my review before leaving promptly, forcing me to begrudgingly correct his mistakes. My clenched fist tightened involuntarily. "Calm down," I told myself as I faced Troy again. "If you were feeling unwell, that's understandable, and everyone oversleeps sometimes. But could you at least notify us?" As a professional, trying to maintain peace in front of the other team members, I aimed to convey my message gently. I tried to keep my tone as soft as possible, but apparently Troy was unusually short-tempered today. "Seriously, you're always nagging. Do you think a dumb high school dropout like you has the right to give me orders?" Troy suddenly slammed his hands on the desk and shouted. His irritation was clear, followed by the sound of him clicking his tongue. A startled female employee let out a small gasp, and the already tense office became even more charged, with no one moving a muscle. This was the first time he had raised his voice so much. Previously, his responses were filled with veiled sarcasm, but to hear such direct and harsh words like "dumb high school dropout" stoked my anger. At the same time, a part of me was disheartened by the realization that this was his true opinion. I had known it, but it was clear that Troy deeply resented the fact that someone like me, a high school dropout, was his team leader. "Troy, you've gone too far." My voice was calmer than I expected. Despite the humiliating remarks, I managed to stay composed, surprising even myself. Troy fell silent for a few seconds, then raised his eyebrows and exhaled a long breath, clearly frustrated. "This is such a drag." With those final words, Troy stood up and walked out without any apology or explanation. His behavior was reminiscent of a rebellious teenager, and I had no desire to chase after him. As he walked away, Everyone who had been watching held their breath and slowly turned their gazes toward me. All right, let's get back to work as usual. I'll handle Troy's tasks. I spoke with a smile to dispel the cold atmosphere and lighten the mood, by implying that I wasn't particularly bothered by the harsh words. The tense junior colleagues also visibly relaxed. One by one, they slowly returned to their work. Among them, I overheard whispers of disbelief and criticism about Troy's behavior. Internally, I agreed with their sentiments, but I focused on the tasks at hand. The next day arrived. I arrived a bit early and was preparing for the start of the day at my desk when a loud bang shattered the morning's calm air. It was the sound of the door being flung open with force. Startled, I looked up to see several figures striding in with large steps. It was Troy, leading the Stanford graduates from the project team. They marched straight to my desk and lined up in a row, with unsettling grins on their faces. "Good morning. What brings you all here together?" I was almost impressed by their sheer nerve, considering the previous day's events. Surrounded, I asked, and Troy, standing in the center, began speaking loudly as if declaring war. "We've been thinking. The company's poor performance growth might be due to having a dumb team leader." What a ridiculous statement. Internally, I was exasperated. Were they here to mock my educational background again? Was he that upset about being called out for his tardiness and comments in front of everyone yesterday? The pettiness was almost nauseating. But his next words took me by surprise. "We would need to be paid 5 times our current salary." What? You heard me. We need to be paid 5 times our current salary to work for an idiot like you, a high school dropout. It's hard enough as it is. It's ridiculous that someone without an education is the leader. Troy's face was etched with genuine contempt as he spoke, shrugging his shoulders. "That's absurd." The words slipped out before I could stop them. I never expected things to take a turn, where I'd be suddenly asked to increase the salary by 5 times. I wanted to shrug my shoulders in disbelief myself. "If you can't meet our demands, then everyone here will quit." With a light laugh, Troy glanced at his followers, and a few of them responded with, "Yes, we'll quit." Including Troy, there were 13 of them, a significant number. So that was their conclusion. "All right, I'll talk to the CEO." My words seemed to surprise Troy, as his eyes widened for a moment. But it was only for an instant. He quickly reverted to his usual overconfident demeanor. He happily told me to do it quickly and leaned against my desk, his back to me. Ignoring him, I reached for the phone on my desk and asked to be connected to the CEO, Stephen, through the company's internal line. Shortly thereafter, the call went through, and I succinctly explained the situation to Stephen. I relayed the group's demands without any sugarcoating. "If you cannot accept these conditions, they have stated that they would like to resign." Yes, that's correct, all 13 of them. As I spoke on the phone, I glanced at the Stanford graduates in front of me. They were fidgeting, unable to hide their restlessness, exchanging glances, and barely suppressing their laughter. Troy, with his back turned, was humming a tune and shaking his leg. "The CEO has something to say to everyone." Following Stephen's instructions, I switched the call to speakerphone. Stephen's familiar voice echoed through the morning office. "Good morning, everyone. This is Stephen. I've heard from Joseph about your situation. It seems you can't tolerate the current environment." "That's right, sir. We believe we can't fully utilize our abilities in this team. In my opinion, Joseph is not suitable as a leader. He shoots down every new and promising idea with baseless objections." Troy began to justify his demands with his signature rapid-fire speech, unleashing a torrent of grievances. I listened in silence, not interrupting, letting his meaningless words wash over me. When Troy finally finished presenting his arguments to Stephen, his smug expression was unmistakable. He was sweating from his passionate tirade, his breath heavy, and his face showed he was certain of victory. "I understand your opinion, Troy. I'm sorry we couldn't provide an environment that meets your expectations." When Stephen said this, the Stanford graduates' faces lit up. I didn't miss Troy quietly making a small fist pump and saying, 5 times my dream salary. What they didn't realize was that the reality they were about to face wasn't so simple. Therefore, I will accept your voluntary resignations. What? Troy's voice was filled with shock, and he was left gaping like a fish. His followers were frozen, clearly not comprehending what they had just been told. A few seconds later, Troy regained his senses and tried to say something, but before he could be heard, Stephen continued, "Please proceed with the resignation process with the HR department within the next few days." With that, Stephen abruptly ended the call. This can't be happening. Troy's followers rushed to him, their faces filled with panic. This isn't what we agreed on. How could this happen? What are we supposed to do starting tomorrow? Clearly, none of them had imagined they could be immediately cut from the company. Their naivety was evident. Some were even murmuring that they had only gone along with it because they thought their salaries would increase. Now, they were trying to shift the blame to Troy for leading them astray with enticing but empty promises. If this many people leave at once, what will happen to the current project? Losing such intelligent personnel is a huge blow to the company. Troy, trying to salvage the situation, appealed to me desperately. Unwilling to accept Stephen's decision, they directed their anger at me. "This company has grown significantly since I started working here. You were hired as part of a new challenge to see if highly educated individuals could contribute to our growth. Then why? The CEO has been observing your performance. Even with my support, it was clear you weren't contributing effectively, so he regretted this experiment. He told me he wished he hadn't hired you." The shock on their faces was unmistakable. They had no idea they had been written off by the CEO. I continued, addressing their stunned expressions. "But since you were already hired, I thought it might be due to my lack of guidance. I asked the CEO to give you more time in my team to see if things could improve." After hearing all this, Troy's followers finally realized the precarious situation they were in and turned pale. They hadn't been discarded yet solely because I had intervened on their behalf. Although I hadn't mentioned it out of courtesy, Stephen had quickly discerned that the Stanford graduate's brand was more of a liability, fostering arrogance and stubbornness. Moreover, Troy's poor attitude towards me hadn't gone unnoticed within the company. When this reached Stephen's ears, he, normally a calm person, was furious and ready to fire them immediately. I had been called in to verify the facts and stopped him from delivering the termination notice. Sure, dealing with Troy had been challenging, and I hadn't always kept my cool, but it had only been a few months. People can change gradually, so I asked for more time to train them. This was a path I had walked myself. I remembered how my seniors had patiently taught me when I was initially incompetent, and I wanted to extend the same patience to them. However, if they no longer wanted to work under me and wished to resign, there was no point in holding them back. "It might have been a burden for you to work with me, but with your education and intelligence, you'll surely find a good company next." I smiled warmly at Troy, delivering the final blow. Whether from anger or desperation, Troy began to tremble, looking much smaller than usual. "What will you do about the personnel? If this project collapses, the financial loss to the company will be substantial." Gone was his initial bravado, and now he was trying to highlight the company's potential losses. But his voice was so strained it was barely audible. "Actually, there's no need to worry about that. The CEO initiated a seminar a few years ago for kids with high school diplomas or less, and I've been involved as an instructor. To be honest, the students attending these seminars are far more capable than you guys who only boast about being Stanford graduates. Several of them have already expressed a desire to join our company, so we'll be able to secure new personnel quickly. Since the HR department will be busy, please complete your resignation procedures as soon as possible." The high achievers were stunned by this unexpected information. Their jaws dropped, and some turned pale, breathing heavily. Their pride and self-esteem as high-achieving graduates shattered. The idea that those they deemed less educated were actually more competent than themselves left them speechless, without any further arguments or insults. "Well, thank you for everything up until now. You should prepare for your departure, so you can go home for today." As I concluded my remarks, Troy collapsed to the floor, utterly defeated. About 6 months later, all those who participated in the complaint had left the company, leaving no Stanford graduates in my team. Some of them came back, saying, "I only went along with the others because I couldn't defy Troy. Please let me stay. I'll work hard and change my attitude." But did they really think those words would change anything? Their actions were unforgivable. I rejected all such requests and only offered some perfunctory encouragement for their job searches. However, it wasn't easy for those who had tried to undermine the company by threatening to leave en masse to find new jobs. And I heard that Troy, in particular, had been blacklisted in related industries due to his reputation as the ringleader. Apparently, they tried to start their own company to make a comeback, but it quickly failed, and when I passed by the building where their office was rumored to be, it was already an empty tenant space. On the other hand, the new recruits from the seminar, who were high school graduates or less, were excellent. They worked hard, were eager to learn, and had a strong sense of teamwork. While I still had to support them frequently, the team was becoming more ideal, and I found myself enjoying my work once again. With the new members, the stalled projects progressed smoothly, and the company's performance improved. I now see that the incident was a valuable learning experience. All right, let's have a great day. I looked around at the project members, their energetic responses giving me a boost. I couldn't be more excited about the future of this company. I continue to work with gratitude, filled with anticipation for what lay ahead.